Good morning. Good morning. So, yesterday I ran a webinar for my clients who are going through the clarity journey. That's my signature coaching program. And it's all about discovering, or growing in greater self-awareness about the scripts that control our lives, and then growing in self-discovery about the design that actually God created us in, as well as ultimately going towards learning how to lead ourselves as we journey in the interior journey, how to grow in self-acceptance, and not just self-acceptance abstractly, but how to grow in self-acceptance as we discover what we actually are like what the true self is actually like. That itself is the task of a lifetime for many of us, right? So during question and answer, there was one question that came up, and it is a really good question. Well, it's kind of like a few questions, but they're all related to each other. And I told the person who had asked this question that I'll take some time and I'm going to reply via video. And this is such a good question when I was pondering about how I would respond to it, that I really wanted to make this available more widely to everyone as well. So that's why I'm putting this into a live, which will become a YouTube video, which will ultimately also come out in my podcast. Okay, so let me share this question. It's linked to a lot of the things that I often talk about, right? The theme of the interior journey. I always talk about how the interior journey is learning to connect with ourselves, with God, and with others, right? To grow in intimacy and in relationship with self, with God, and with others. So the question that was asked, I'm going to read it out now, is, does connecting to self necessarily result in connecting with others? Okay, so does connecting with self necessarily result in connecting with others? Secondly, what if my true self doesn't land well with others? Perhaps the larger question that I have is, what are the indicators of growth in the interior journey? And is connection with others one of them? Okay, so the question, I think, as I sat with it, is, it's kind of like there are two dimensions to this. One is learning to connect with myself, definitely necessarily going to yield a better connection with others. Okay, that's the main question. And kind of like the sub question, the secondary question, but I think it's it almost feels like emotively this is the more important question. It is, what if my true self doesn't land well with others, right? So if my true self doesn't land well with others, how would that lead to a better connection with others? Because connecting with myself usually means that then I will be in touch with my true self. And in the interior journey, when we talk about integration, it's always about how to live out of my true self. But what if my true self doesn't land well with others? How would that lead to a better connection with others? Okay, so if one of the indicators of interior growth is a better connection to self, would a better connection with others also be an indicator of the interior journey or growth in the interior journey? And how would that make sense if when I am being my true self, it doesn't always land well with others? Okay, I hope I've kind of articulated the question well. So I'm going to speak to this just off the cuff. This is really how I would have a conversation. I guess if you were sitting across me, having a cup of coffee. I feel a lot for this question because, like I said, the more emotive question is, if I become my true self and that doesn't land well with others, how is that going to improve my relationship with others, right? So I'm going to try and break down and nuance my response by breaking down some of the assumptions that we may inherently hold without realizing that we hold these assumptions or these presuppositions, okay? So the first nuance I want to say is when we talk about the integration journey and the interior journey, and we talk about connection, whether it is with self, with God, or with other people, the word or the term authentic is a very important one to bear in mind, okay? Because when we act out of our scripts, we are actually seeking connection with others too. Okay, when we act out of our life scripts, when we are acting out of our coping mechanisms, we are seeking connection because that is our drive. We are created to be in relationship with others. We desire connection with others, right? Because we're created for love. So when we have experienced rejection, maybe even consistently, that our authentic self is not really welcome, let's say in a family of origin, right? It may not be overt. It could be overt or it could be very implied, but we've picked up somehow the message that me as I am, when I show up in certain ways, is not welcome. I may hide that part of myself. I may develop a different persona that I show up in, because when I show up with that persona, or when I hide or suppress certain parts of myself, that actually allows me to have some kind of connection with, let's say, my family, with my parents, with the people in my life. Okay, so we are always driven, in some sense, with a desire to seek connection, and we always try to establish connection. Even when, you may have heard of this before, how sometimes children who behave badly, in a kind of like strange way, they may not even be realizing that themselves. They behave badly because that gets their parents' attention, right? Like if they can't get their parents' attention any other way, somehow bad behavior, even though it's going to get them disciplined or scolded or whatnot, but somehow it's a form of attention, and a very warped and distorted way is some form of connection. All right. So when we're talking about deepening connection in the interior journey, when we're healing, when we're integrating, we are talking about not just any kind of connection. We are talking about healthy, authentic connection. Okay. And when we talk about healthy, authentic connection, I want to just put it out there. Some of us may have some kind of assumption that authentic connection always feels good, or the authentic connection always is easy or comfortable, pleasurable, that it will make us happy. Now, I just want to say we have to debunk that assumption, all right? Over the longer term, there will be greater peace and joy, yes, because we can be ourselves, because we are connected authentically with ourselves, for example, right? We feel secure in ourselves. So that would lead to inner peace. That would lead to inner stability. But whether we're talking about building an authentic connection with ourselves or with someone else, or even with God, it is often challenging and difficult. And I just want to say, that part of the question earlier, what if my true self doesn't land well with others? Well, guess what? Your true self definitely will not land well with some people. In fact, your true self may not land well with yourself. In the sense, in the process. So building connection or deepening authentic connection is a journey, is a process, right? It's a process of growth, and growth is never comfortable. So when I bring my clients through the journey in clarity, for example, and that's a journey that I went through myself, right? As I grew in more security, I began to see more facets about my true self, or the way that God created me. And I have to confess that there were times, in fact, many times, when my reaction is not, oh, yay, this is me. My reaction is, oh my Lord, like, why is that me? I don't like that. I don't like that. The real me seems to be someone who's pretty free-spirited and free-willing. Like to me, that like my life script has conditioned me to value responsibility, stability, predictability, I suppose, in a way, over free-spiritedness, over adaptability, right? And so when I realized that the real me is really, I think the term free spirit is quite apt. Although I think I shared in one of my previous podcast episodes that when a friend of mine, now this is almost 20 years ago, when I was still in graduate school, and this was a friend in Canada, in Toronto, Canada, when she told me, oh, and you're such a free spirit. Okay, and this is an older friend. I was like the youngest in class, and this was an older friend. I think she meant it. I know she meant it as a compliment, but boy, oh boy, I did not receive it as a compliment. I thought it was bad. It's a bad thing that someone actually thought I was a free spirit. And then fast forward, like maybe I think at the time was maybe about 10 years later, when I was beginning to heal and there were facets of my personality that were emerging that had been repressed for so long in my life. And I began to see that I actually was a free spirit. I do not like to be controlled or confined or restricted. I am most alive when I can explore and try things and push boundaries. It took me a while to be able to be okay with that. Okay, so that's an example of how, as my true self was emerging, it didn't land well with me. And clearly, as my true self emerged more and more, it didn't land well with other people. I mean, not everyone, or even with this, or not, even with the people that love me, my true self doesn't always land well with them. That's just life, right? That's life. So I just want to say, yes, it's definitely going to happen. But guess what? Even when we're living out of our personas, even when we're living out of our life scripts, a lot of times the way we show up don't land well with others either. That's the thing for people pleasers, right? Like myself, recovering people pleaser. I tried so hard for so long to show up in a way that will land well with others, so to speak. And oftentimes I will still find that no matter how hard I try, I can't. Right? And I think that's also because there is a part of me that really does value authenticity. So even though I'm conflict avoidant, and even though I really would like for people to be happy with me, there's just certain lines I cannot cross, and try as I might maybe to be gentler in the way that I show up, gentler in the sense of so that it wouldn't rub people the wrong way, I find that I will still fail. So whether we live out of our scripts or we show up as our true self, it will sometimes not land well with other people. But here's the difference. When I am showing up only, I just want to say also, personas are not necessarily a negative thing, okay? Sometimes personas are like facets of ourselves that we allow to be more pronounced when we're playing particular roles. Maybe let's say a professional role, an example. But the important thing is that the persona doesn't get fused to our identity, right? That actually there is that real self. The foundation, the core self, is the one that is actually relating and connecting with others. But when we don't know who we are, or when we are still very fragmented, we are not able to show up. It's almost like our persona is all there is. And sometimes we confuse our persona with our true self. And that is why so many of us feel abandoned even by ourselves. Okay? That sense of loneliness, of abandonment, of emptiness is not just because we feel that there's no one outside, like no one else that can really connect with us. It often is the result of our failure to connect with ourselves, our failure to see ourselves as we are. When we are able to connect authentically with ourselves, and when we begin to show up as our true self, even when it doesn't land well with some people, the thing is, it is real. It is real. So at least within me, my desire to connect with others, to show up and have authentic connection with others is there. And part of showing up as my true self is the ability to accept that not everyone is going to be okay with me as I am. Maybe not all the time. Maybe certain times when I show up as my true self, when I say certain things or act in a certain way, or when I draw certain boundaries, it may not be received well. But that's okay. That's okay. The thing about our true self, or when we're connected with our true self, is that there is a lot less reactivity and defensiveness. We are grounded in the reality or the truth that, in relationships, when we connect with others, we will rub one another the wrong way sometimes. And there are so many different explanations or reasons why that may be, right? It doesn't mean that discomfort, it doesn't mean that sense that maybe I don't land well with others is not good. Okay, so let me give another example here. When I began to learn to listen to my own needs, it changed the way I showed up as a wife to my husband. When I was living out of my scripts, being a good everything is so important to me, right? So being a good wife. But here's also the thing. None of us have just an empty concept about what it means to be like a good spouse or good wife, right? We have certain descriptors, ideas of what that is like. So it was the case for me. I was brought up and conditioned to think that a good wife is, in some sense, I'll always put my husband's needs before mine, that to be loving always meant to be self-sacrificing. And because I never knew how to connect and even hear my own needs and self, I was always just playing that role of the good wife. There was no real authentic connection. I mean, there was connection. I don't want to say that there's absolutely no authentic connection. There was connection, but there was so little of my true self in that. There was so many layers of fear, of insecurity, of my husband becoming unhappy with me, or my husband maybe loving me less, or that he might stop loving me, right? That a lot of that was subconsciously driving my behavior or my choices. When I began to learn to connect with myself, and it was scary. So like I said, this whole process is uncomfortable and it's scary. I began to learn to speak or communicate when I cannot offer him what it is that he needs from me in that moment, whether it is an act of service, whether it is time to listen to him talk about his day. So in an example that I'm sure I've mentioned before, usually if I have the capacity, I'm very, very happy to hold space for him if he has had a hard day. But sometimes I am unpacking something as well myself, and now that I'm more aware, I can realize how unsettled I am inside. In the past, I would just shove that aside. Even if I was becoming aware of it, I'll shove that aside and think, no, my husband's needs come first, right? But even if I cannot be really present to him, at some point, I learned to speak up and honestly say, I hear you, and I know it was difficult for you to communicate what you wanted to communicate. Let's say it was something that was also very vulnerable that he had communicated to me, that he needed me in a certain way to show up for him that day. But the truth is, and I said, and it doesn't mean I love you, but the truth is, I can't do that for you right now, because right now I am very dysregulated myself. Right? I can't. So I need space right now. I need some time. I'm so sorry. I wish I could say that I could do that for you. I wish I could hold that space for you, for example. I know you're seeking that connection with me, but I can't do it. Okay. How do you think it landed with him? Well, did he welcome it? I mean, no. Okay, and I'm saying this not as a bad thing. I mean, in that moment, it would have been very hard for him, right, to receive that, because he actually did, it was vulnerable of him to actually say that, to ask what he wanted to ask. But it was also very vulnerable of me to show up in honesty and authenticity and tell him that. And what was new for me was that I told myself, It's okay for him to be upset with me. He is allowed to be upset with me. If I were in his shoes, I would be upset too. This is two people showing up at the best of our ability at this point in time. Unfortunately, both of us showing up at our best at this point in time can't give each other what we need from each other. That's just reality. That doesn't mean we don't love each other, right? So before I was more integrated, I think I couldn't stand the thought of, the feeling of my husband being upset with me. And that's what would drive my behavior. I would try and change what I say or do so that he wouldn't be upset, because I would feel like I was a failure if I couldn't fix his problem or I couldn't make him happy. But when I became more integrated, like slowly over time, I realized that no, that's not real intimacy, right? That's not a real loving relationship. A really authentic loving relationship is that we can both show up as ourselves and allow the other his or her emotions, right? So even if it means being upset or angry, well, we need to give each other that space and that time to process it, to work through it, to journey through it, whatever it is, whatever that is, right? So in the moment, sometimes showing up as our true self, or saying something or acting in a way that we believe has true integrity to who we are and who God is calling us to be, may be hard for some people. And it may not say anything about how right or wrong either they or we are. Sometimes our best is very limited, right? That's the other thing. I can look back sometimes now, I can look back at what I had done before and recognize really honestly that the best at that time was really very poor, in the sense that, it really hurt people, right? And I won't deny that. I won't deny that anymore. But I also feel I don't need to deny that, because that was the best I could do then, right? So authenticity, or when we are having a real authentic connection with ourselves, allows us to show up as our real self and make possible a deeper, more authentic connection with others, even if that connection is an uncomfortable one, even if, so to speak, my true self doesn't land well with others. Okay, so to the question that was asked, so how then does showing up as myself, connecting to myself and being my true self necessarily, or does it really mean that I'll connect better with others if my true self doesn't land well with others? I hope that my response so far helps a little to nuance that, okay? That your true self may not always land well with others, but that doesn't mean that you're not making an authentic connection with others. So part of the integration journey is becoming more okay with allowing other people their emotions, even if that emotion can be felt a bit like in that moment that they are rejecting us. That's the beauty of integration and healing. We become more secure and stable within ourselves. We become more able to withstand that. And we allow others the space they need to make their interior journey, to process whatever it is that they need to process. Because we know that however we quote unquote land with others, our true self land with others, doesn't change our worth, our dignity, our beauty, the truth of who we are. Okay, so the second part of this question was, the larger question is, what are the indicators of growth in the interior journey, right? And is connection with others necessarily one of them? So, I'm going to say, especially speaking as a person of faith, one very helpful way of just thinking in general, indicators of growth in the interior journey, okay? The whole interior journey, whether it's spiritual or human, really. I think one good reference point is the fruits of the Holy Spirit. Okay, so this is taken from the letter to the Galatians, St. Paul's letter to the Galatians, chapter 5. Okay, so the 9 fruits of the Holy Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Okay, just so listen again and take it in. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Now, when we are making the interior journey, indicators of growth would include experiencing these fruits in our connection with ourselves as well as our connection with others. There's more love, there's more joy, even when things are difficult. So for example, even when my true self doesn't land well with others, guess what? I actually experience more peace than before. There's strangely still a joy, even in the midst of my pain and discomfort. Maybe there are some parts of me that feel rejected, but there is a joy that I didn't have before, that I could actually not betray myself and be myself. There's joy there, right? I become more patient, both with myself and with others, right? I find that I'm kinder. Okay, some of these terms, I want to say we also need to bear in mind that we have assumptions of what they should look and feel like, and sometimes they could be problematic, okay? So for example, self-control is a big one, especially when it is used in a very religious kind of context. We think of discipline and self-control as a very outwardly imposed. So even with ourselves, it's like, it could be a harsh, I control myself. It's more about behavior modification to make sure that I don't lose my temper, for example, because I think it's not good to lose my temper, right? To be angry at others. That's not the true meaning of self-control here. Think about living from the inside out, authentically. It's not just about controlling my behavior, because when I'm controlling my behavior, I could do it by bypassing my emotions. I could do it by ignoring and repressing and suppressing my emotions, for example, right? A lot of us, we're just so focused on the behavior that we think self-control is about controlling behavior. I think a better way to think about self-control here would be related with what we talk about also, regulation, right? Emotional regulation is an inside-out process. It includes connecting with ourselves, giving ourselves the acknowledgement, the non-judgmental acknowledgement of what's going on inside, and going through the whole process to showing up more authentically. For our external behavior, if you really want to imagine it, if you want to think about external behavior really reaching a level at which, you're very emotionally mature, less incidents of, let's say, losing your temper and all that kind of thing. That's not going to be an immediate thing. When we're focused on behavior modification, we want the result right now, and we don't care that we suppress what's going on inside us. But when we make the integration journey, what we want is the authentic process of that growth, right? Over time, when you make that interior journey, you'll find that self-control is not something that you attain. It's not something that you achieve even. It is a fruit of the Holy Spirit. That's why the image of fruit is so important. Fruit is what comes naturally, organically, when a plant or a tree is well taken care of, right? If there is planted in good soil, if it's watered, if it gets sunlight, if there's enough nutrient, it will naturally, in time, bear fruit. So these are fruit, and they're not traits that we perform, okay? We don't try to perform kindness. I mean, yes, I know we do, but that's not what we're talking about in the interior journey. Kindness and real generosity and faithfulness is another big word that I think we often have conceptions of what that should look and feel like, which can actually be quite damaging. Okay? Inside out, from the inside out. A fidelity that comes, especially in this context, in a spiritual context, from experiencing and receiving God's faithful love for us. We do not have faithfulness to give if it is not a fruit of receiving and growing from the faithfulness that God pours into us from Himself. Right? So when you look at the fruits of the Spirit, you can see also how that would also yield. When I often talk about greater compassion for self and greater compassion for others. It's right there. We become more gentle, we're kinder, we're more generous. We're more generous, which also means we're less judgmental, right? Our hearts, quite literally in a sense, expand in space because the Holy Spirit grows us and expands us. So in terms of indicators of growth, I would say it would be, the fruits of the Holy Spirit. And is connection with others one of them? So yes, in terms of authentic connection, right? So I nuanced at the start of this response that it's not just any kind of connection, because we can have inauthentic connection. Sometimes some connection is better than none. We will always have connection. But if we make this integration journey and we over time see the fruits of the Holy Spirit, you will find that we definitely will grow in authentic connection with others. Just remember, authentic connection doesn't necessarily mean it's comfortable. It doesn't mean that it's happy. Sometimes an authentic connection could mean being rejected. Just think of the prophets in the Old Testament. Or think of Jesus. Think of Jesus, for crying out loud. He showed up as his true self. He showed up in authentic connection. He loved everyone, right? But sometimes that authentic connection meant speaking hard truths and calling people hypocrites, right? And his authenticity, he's showing up as his true self. Did it land well with others? Of course, clearly it didn't land well with everyone. He was crucified. He was persecuted and crucified, right? So he already said as well in the gospel that, right, no servant is greater than a master. Whatever has happened to him will happen to us. In a sense, that's part of the path of discipleship. But what we have, just like what Jesus had, continues to be that fruit of the Spirit. In spite of sometimes our true self not landing well with others, we are loving them more than we would have been able to love them in the past when we were only trying to perform to win their affection or to win their approval or to avoid conflict, for example. Right? So we are more real than before. So in that sense, we are actually, in a deeper reality sense, we are actually more authentically connecting to them. And sometimes that connection may expose what needs to be exposed, both in them or in ourselves. So once we can remember and accept that authentic connections don't necessarily mean comfortable, don't necessarily mean happy, pleasurable, but we're looking at the deeper qualities over time of the fruits of the Holy Spirit, then you'll understand why it is that really learning to connect with ourselves in that authentic way that we are growing in the interior journey will yield and lead to authentic connections with others. Okay, so that's just my response to that question. Hello to a couple of you who are here live. Do you have any questions on this topic? So it was about, I was just answering a question about, does connecting to self necessarily result in connecting with others? Right? And I'm saying, if we are talking about authentic connection and not just any kind of connection, then yes, even though that connection may sometimes be uncomfortable and challenging and difficult. So if no questions, if you have any kind of like continuing questions, or after you revisit the full sharing, please, as always, find me in my direct message and I'll be very happy to respond to that. Okay, so otherwise I'll just end this sharing here, and I hope that this has helped you, whoever it is, those of you who are watching this or listening to this, be able to understand or expand your understanding, really, of what it means to have authentic connection with self and others as the fruit of making the interior journey. God bless, and bye.